Hey everyone, welcome to this studio demonstration illustrating a silhouette in ink. I'm Professor Thornock. Here are all the supplies that I use for this demo so that you know what you'll need to begin your project. Now, as I begin, I've got some scratch paper here and I'm going to just simply do a little character study, a little profile of character. Probably, I think as I began working on this, something in the Old West theme, maybe a cowboy or an old man with some sort of cowboy hat. I'm working just in graphite on some drawing paper, working large shapes. One of the important things to remember when you're working in silhouette is you're really dependent on storytelling on the outside contour of your character. So the more information that you can include in this exterior contour, the better the read will be. So shape design is really important. I want to maybe make sure that I've got indications of things like hair or the nose. I think my little character's going to have a mustache, so I put that on him. If you try to rely on someone's thoughts of, well, they know that there's an eye here, or they know that the hand passes in front of them, you lose. You want to make sure that you exaggerate the exterior information, or the exterior contour. Now, as you can see as I sketch, I don't really pay attention too much to what's going on inside, except for places where I do a draw through, like to make sure I get that oval kind of nice and where it matches on either side of the head. Transitions are important. Little details are important. So maybe doing a little hat band on his hat. Just a little change in direction there will make the image a little more interesting. As I work, I sometimes clean up some of those lines so that I can get a better idea in my head about what it's going to look like when it's filled in. And I'm just using my kneaded eraser for that. As I shape design, I think about things like curves versus straights. So should the line be a straight line or a slight S-curve? It's little things like that to sort of refine my image. The other thing that I notice a lot of students don't do is they don't work with a sharp pencil. So make sure your pencils are nice and sharp when you're working. I'm just using an HB pencil. That gives me a good range of light and dark marks. It's easily erasable. If I'm working in a 6B, it's a mess. So a little curve there for the chin, little straights from underneath this mustache. See, I could just leave that line of his neck plain, or I can give him a little collar, like his collar's turned up. So I just sort of tilt it up into the head there. Maybe I want to show that that's hair in the back. So I might adjust the end of those lines to make it look like there's, it's individual hairs, maybe grouping up. You see that I've got a couple sheets of paper underneath the piece of paper that I'm working on. That provides a kind of a softer drawing surface. I have a cutting mat underneath, and sometimes when you cut on the surface that you're drawing on, you'll get unwanted lines and things. So I like to always have a couple sheets of paper underneath my drawing paper to give me a nice clean feel to the drawing, and I don't get weird little interruptions that I didn't expect. Now his face wasn't complete without a little cigarette. So I added this little cigarette into this old codger's face there. A little puff of smoke. Remember, you're designing everything. You're designing the way the cigarette is drawn. You're designing how the smoke is coming up. It's not just as simple as worrying about the exterior contour of their favorite parts, like the profile of his head. So like on his hat, I'm giving him a little cutout. Like his hat's a little old and he's got a little hole in it there on the top from where he's grabbed a hold and pinched it. Details, details, details. As we say, the devil is in the details, and it really is. It shows your lack of consideration and care in your piece. So there's the drawing. Pretty happy with it. Now, I'm going to put it on this piece of Bristol paper. Bristol paper is great for working on. I use a vellum surface Bristol paper. Some people use smooth. Both work really great with ink. And I'm just going to transfer it. Now, I could transfer it in a couple of ways. I could use light table and then just tape my piece of Bristol paper on the top, and then turn the light table on and just trace it. In this instance, I just want to show you how you can transfer it simply by coloring the back of your paper with graphite. And then I'll tape my Bristol paper to the back, and then using a ballpoint pen, I can just sort of trace over my contour line, and it will match up. Now I have to make sure that I get the image centered nicely. So that's why I'm holding it up every now and then to sort of check through the light. Now I'm using a painter's tape here because it's low tack. It's easy to peel off and won't damage my drawing paper. Also, you can see that I'm putting the paper only on one side, so it's like a hinge. And that way, as I work, I can lift up the sketch and sort of check on my progress, make sure that it's transferring correctly. So now, just using a ballpoint pen, I'm kind of pushing hard, but not too hard. I don't want to dent the paper underneath. And I'll lift up, sort of check my progress. Yes, it looks good. Okay, that's the right amount of pressure. And then I carefully go over the whole contour. You'd probably want to use a fine point or medium point ballpoint pen. You could use your pencil. I like to use the pen because it's got a harder tip, doesn't dull out, especially on bigger projects. I don't have to keep sharpening it. The other thing with the pen, and I'm using a red pen here, is that I can see where I've traced over so that I don't untape everything and then realize, oh, I missed a huge spot. So I can trace over everything. You'll see, in my sketch here that it's turning red. And then that's just an easy way for me to check. So just make sure that you do a good job with this part. Go slow. Right now I can just lift it back, make sure that I got all parts covered. It's a little faint here in the video, but I assure you it transferred. So now I just take the tape off. And I've got my piece ready to go. Set my sketch aside. Now you could redraw over the top of that with pencil, but I'm just going to use my Micron pen to start. Now I want to go slow and careful because this contour line is the outer edge, the outer contour of my image. I want to make sure that I don't rest my hand at any point on top of the inked line, because that's a great way to smear your drawing. If you have problems with that, you want to use like a piece of paper towel or a second sheet of paper to slip underneath the palm of your hand while you're drawing. But I just sort of turn my paper as I go, keeping my hand out of the drawing as much as possible. I'm going very deliberately, an even sort of pressure and an even speed as I put these lines down. There'll be places also where I sort of start and stop within the shape. That way I'll have nice clean corners, and it will get covered up in ink when it's all finished anyway, so it's not a big deal. Whenever doing a project that requires a steady hand, I think it's always a good idea that, number one, and this is going to sound weird, that you've eaten. If you're jittery because you haven't eaten, or if you've had too much caffeine, or if you're tired, any of those things can kind of affect the way you draw. So you want to be kind of in a good sort of physical state when you're working. It makes a huge difference on your ability to concentrate and to have nice, clean, confident lines. So now I'm switching to my brush and ink. I have a jar of water. It's usually a good idea to do what I'm just doing right now earlier. You want to get the brush wet and let the water sort of soak into the bristles, and it'll just relax the brush a little bit. Now that my ink outline has dried a few minutes, I'm just taking this eraser and I'm going to get rid of any graphite marks now. But you've got to make sure that the lines have dried. If not, you will smear your drawing. Now, I love this ink. It's just Sumi ink. I like the small bottle. It's fatter on the bottom. It's easier to not tip over when I'm working. And here I have a scratch sheet of paper, so this is going to help me sort of test out my the ink in my brush. So I put ink on the brush and then I try and remove as much as possible off of it. You don't want to like go too crazy and getting ink all over your brush. It shouldn't be passing into the ferrule, which is that metal part of your brush. You don't want ink covering that. You just want it in the bristles. Now, I work, generally speaking, from the outside in. So I'm going to, for most of this, sort of go around the contour. I've got a nice steady hand. I'm not tired. So I can get that. And then I'll fill in, the larger areas later. But it doesn't really matter. It just is sort of a preference of mine. This goes a lot faster than trying to take a pen and color this in. You could do the whole thing just in brush if you can be very careful with your line work at the beginning. But I think if you haven't done this before, setting everything down with a tool that you're much more familiar with, like that Micron pen, really helps. I caution students don't do that beginning line work with like a gel pen. That ink and gel pens takes a long time to dry, especially on Bristol paper. So a pen that dries a little quicker is better. Plus that ink is really great in the Micron pens. The other thing, Bristol paper is really interesting. It's got a lot of what's called sizing mixed into the fibers as it's made, which means that it's resistant to buckling. If it gets too wet, it will buckle, but it's got kind of a nice sort of surface where the ink sits up on top as opposed to sort of soaking down in to the paper. And you don't want your ink to be watered down. So, and if you have areas in your silhouette that appear to be not as dense and black as other areas, you want to make sure that you go back over those areas. You want a nice deep black. Now, obviously, as illustration has gone on, so many illustrators now work digitally as opposed to traditionally. I think understanding and being able to do it traditionally first helps your work when you transition to a digital workspace. Plus, it's really nice to have an object when you're finished. So for the object hood of this, I'm going to be done and I'm going to have a little drawing. It's going to be awesome. Otherwise, it's just ones and zeros stored in a folder somewhere on a desktop. So I've gone around most of the edges. Now I'm going to just kind of fill in. I'm being very careful to not drip ink as I go from my bottle to my drawing. I don't want sort of little surprises. You also see that the ink is kind of set further away from me so that I don't accidentally knock it over while I'm working. Again, turning the page around and around, keep my hand out of it. A little trick to speed up the drying of your ink or any sort of water-based media is a hairdryer. You can plug a hairdryer in nearby within arm's reach, and then if things are taking too long to dry, you can just hit it with the hairdryer, and it'll speed up the process quite a bit. Another thing that's really important as you work is to really be critical of the job you're doing. So being conscientious of, is this the best that I can do? Can I focus a little more? Removing distractions really helps with this. Sometimes if you've got Netflix going or you're talking with somebody while working or other distractions, it makes it really hard. So if you can remove those distractions, remove this temptation to watch something else while you're trying to work on these pieces, it will only make your work better. Now, I think I did not like that little hiccup in the top of his hat, that little hole, so I ended up inking it out. I just thought it looked too small and it wasn't strong enough a design. And just double checking all my work, going back and finishing out the edges and little corners. All right, that looks pretty good. So recap your ink. Make sure it's on really tight. Wipe as much ink as you can off before you do this. So this is just a jar of clean water, tap water. And I need to rinse all that ink out. Now the ink is not only in the end of the bristles, but the ink travels up and inside that ferrule because your bristles actually pass underneath that ferrule. So I'm going to wash it through a couple of times. You can see that while the bristles might look clean in the end, closer to the ferrule, they're dirty. So you can use soap to clean your brush out when you're all finished for the day. This is a soap specifically made for brushes, but you could use something that's fine for your hair, shampoo, or even a bar soap would work just great. And I just put a little bit on there with some water, and you can see how gray the suds are. That means that even with the rinsing out, I didn't do a very good job. I rinse all that soapy stuff out of the bristles. Now I don't have anything coming in. Now you want to point the bristles so that the next time after they dry, it's all ready to go. Protect your brushes after you wash them as well, or rinse them out, because as they dry, if they're bent in any way, they'll sort of take that shape. So I've done this project multiple times for students, and I thought I'd show you a few examples of some of the things I've done. A little monkey head, a little old guy with a earring and glasses, a girl with a beret. I like this one, little owl, pirate. Small little heads. You can see how adding information on the inside adds to the storytelling. These are all, again, done on Bristol paper in the same technique that I just showed you. All right, well, I hope this was useful for you. Thanks for watching, and good luck on your project.